late 1850s, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem that has become one of the most indelible poems in all of American literature. Now, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, I think, is a good case study for thinking about prosody. And so I want to look in depth at the opening stanza. The opening stanza is 5 lines long, and it starts with lines that are likely familiar to you. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is still alive who remembers that famous day and year. It sounds pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of old-fashioned terms. There is that shall in the first line, which is a little old-fashioned, but it's pretty straightforward. And Longfellow really tried, especially in his popularly pitched poetry, to speak the language of the people. He's writing this in the late 1850s. He sees that conflict is on the horizon, and this poem has often been interpreted not as a reminiscence of something like, the good old days of the Revolution, but we learn from the Revolution that men are called to do hard things and stand up for justice, and that's going to be something that we're called to soon. And of course, as we know, within a year or two of its publication, the Civil War starts. Let's look at the rhythms that Longfellow is using. Listen, my children, and you shall hear. This is a deceptively simple line. It seems simple. It's not very simple. Let me explain what is going on with the rhythm. So if we just think about pure rhythm, we don't try and talk about, iambic tetrameter yet or anything. We have, listen, my children, and you shall hear. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That sounds pretty regular to our ears. But let's break it down a little further. If we think in terms of 2 and 3 syllable feet, this line is super odd. We have a da-da-da, and then another da-da-da. Listen, my children, and. This might make us think, well, this is a 3-syllable foot type of line. There will only be 3-syllable feet in it. We have 2 3-syllable feet at the beginning. These are recognizable as dactyls, stressed, unstressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, unstressed. But then the last part of the line does not follow that at all. Listen, my children, and you shall hear. There's actually only 3 syllables after those first 2 dactyls. And it's you shall hear, that's an antibachius, a stressed, unstressed, stressed. But the discerning ear might start thinking, well, no, that actually sounds like the end of an iambic line. And you shall hear is just 2 iambs, da-da-da-da. But the opening syllables and how they're structured make it feel like it's not going to be an iambic poem or even a trochaic poem, but a dactylic poem. So what is going on? Well, I think there's actually several ways to talk about the structure metrically of this line. It could be 2 dactyls and an antibachius. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. What I think, though, is going on is that it's a dactyl, a trochee, and 2 iambs. It's actually a line mostly made up of 2-syllable feet that begins with a 3-syllable foot. So it would be, listen, my, da-da-da, children, da-da-da-da-da, listen, my children. So dactyl, trochee, and then 2 regular iambs, and you shall hear. Now, you might ask me, well, that's arbitrary. Why not call it a 3-foot line that's dactyl, dactyl, antibachius? Well, I think that we should start thinking in terms of 2-syllable feet because there's a lot of 2-syllable feet in the rest of the poem. Let's look at this next line, the second line, of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, if you're listening for 2-syllable feet, you might say, oh, the last few feet of that line are just regular iambs. Night ride of Paul Revere. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But we have a 3-syllable foot at the beginning of the mid. Da-da-da. That's an anapest. So if we were to just talk about the technical rhythm of the second line, it would be anapest, I am, I am, I am. It's interesting that if you think about how many stressed syllables are in this second line, it actually matches exactly the number of stressed syllables in the first line. Listen, my children, and you shall hear. 4 stressed syllables of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. These matching number of stressed syllables is actually what creates the feeling of regularity between these two lines that actually don't have a lot in common metrically. It also is what suggests to me that we should see the "and you shall hear" as 2 two-syllable feet that are iambic. So the "listen, my children" is sort of a variation drawing us in with a strong first stressed syllable. Listen, listen up. But then it's leading us actually into a more fundamentally iambic rhythm. Anapests, as I mentioned in previous videos, go with iambs very well, and it's easy to substitute an anapest into an iambic line without making us feel like it's disrupting too much. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Or da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That extra unstressed syllable within an anapest can just kind of feel like a fun, slight variation as opposed to some sort of wrench in the system. Let's see if this bears out in the last 3 lines. On the 18th of April in 75. This is interesting because it's pretty much a straight anapestic line. Da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. On the 18th of April in 75. In the second line, he gives us a mostly iambic line with an anapest at the beginning. In this next line, he gives us all anapests. But how many stressed syllables are there? On the 18th of April in 75. 4 stressed syllables, just like the second line, just like the first line. So we have that superstructure, or maybe we would call it an understructure, of 4 strong beats. And Longfellow knows how English sounds and knows how our ears work enough to say, hey, I can get away with having that beat come at the beginning of a dactyl sometimes, at the end of an anapest sometimes, and then mostly within iambs. Hardly a man is still alive who remembers that famous day and year. Both of those are 4 stressed syllables, but hardly a man is still alive is another one of these lines, like the first that starts with a dactyl. Hardly a man is still alive. It resolves into a regular iambic pattern by the end. Who remembers that famous day and year. That line, the 5th, gives us 2 anapests and 2 iambs to round out the stanza. Now, when I first read this poem with a critical eye, as someone who cared about prosody when I was in grad school, I was kind of frustrated with Longfellow because I thought, this isn't very regular. You're throwing in dactyls and iambs and anapests. Be more regular. But Longfellow was late in his career here. He had been publishing poetry for 20 years. He had had the ear of the public for even longer than that. He had been teaching modern literature from Dante to Goethe to Shakespeare to Schelling. He knew what he could not get away with, but he knew the ways he could vary rhythms and vary structures, but keep the fundamental 4 beats the same. And so draw us into a galloping and halting and rushing forward and pausing. He could do that with a language that he knew the sound of, and he had mastery over the construction of those various sounds. So if you're wondering, why does prosody matter? Why should I care about, counting out beats? I think it shows us how a poem like The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere could be so various and interesting, and yet fundamentally organized in such a way that it's still one of the most recognizable poems of American literature over a century and a half after it was written.